What a way to start a show. And we are live. Welcome to the MLB Strategy Show. It is Tuesday, September. I'm almost positive it's 21st. We're going 21st. 21st. Nice. Gets it. I am Josh Engelman. I am joined by Adam Scher. We are here to break down an 11-game MLB main slate. But before we do, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you know when everything goes live. We still got a lot to talk about. What do we got? 9, 10, I don't know, like just under 2 weeks of baseball season left to go. Nothing's changing though. We still got it. And it's a little bit easier, at least from a baseball perspective. You might get a little bit more pinch hitters and stuff in late September, but number one hitter still got to go up there first and second. You don't get into the same sort of total weirdness that you can get into in the NBA season. Adam, you and I haven't talked about baseball for a couple of days. I know how your NFL went yesterday. Well, I mean, if we're being technical, I also know how your baseball went. But how was baseball for you yesterday?
Yeah, normal. Didn't get killed. Didn't win. Typical tournament. I don't know. I mean, I had the Astros, had the Braves. Just didn't have like the lineup that won the big tournament on DraftKings was Astros plus Braves plus Ray plus Peralta. Like a little more ownership than I was ever going to play. So didn't quite get there, but happens.
Well, that'll work. By the way, shout out to Jock Market for being the presenting sponsor of this show. We'll talk a little bit about Jock Market in the future, but for now, we've got 11 games to get through. Some question marks on this slate as of right now, but I'm ready to start if you are.
Yep.
And we are starting with two of the biggest question marks on the slate. I've got the Phillies with a 6.1 run implied total, Orioles 4.4. Potentially Matt Moore and Chris Ellis. There are not starters for either side of this game as of right now. This is what I'm going forward with, Moore and Ellis. And I don't really know what else I can say about these guys.
Yeah, I mean, that seems fine to me. Ellis last pitched on the 16th, so he'd be in line to pitch today. Moore pitched, I don't know because it won't load. Also pitched the 16th, so seems like he'd be in line. I think we would expect Ellis to go more innings, just given that Moore threw one inning last time out, but not going to really matter, I don't think, from a DFS standpoint as far as rostering them.
Yeah, I don't anticipate getting to either pitcher here. If someone else gets named the starter, then we will update that information on the deeper dive at 5 p.m. later today. Certainly going to be a spot we're looking for bats, though. I've got the Phillies as my number 2 stack overall, whether it's Chris Ellis or not. Monster run total, great park for home runs, average-ish offense, but either way, barring the pricing is a problem here. I think these guys are going to be very popular because outside of 6K Bryce Harper, this projected lineup is 4,200 and cheaper. This is probably going to be the most over-owned spot, but they're still going to look like a great stack.
Yeah, right now we have them projected to be the most over-owned team. 3.5% chance of being the top stack, 10% aggregate ownership. So definitely something to pay attention to. They're going to project really well. The salaries are really favorable. Real Muto is always one of the better catching options. So certainly a team that you can use for value, but pay attention to the rest of your lineup. It does help that it's an 11-game slate, though, and there is a Coors Field game. So ownership can only really get so crazy, even if, a team is going to be overowned.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that we're in any position to rely on them for the top stack tool right now just because of the lack of starting pitchers. I don't think that they're going to be 2, 4, 6, 8, 9th today,
right?
Just based on that information. So I think that that'll update a little bit further as we move on. Yeah, I actually have them based on our current ownership. I have them under owned, but I assume this number comes up. I just think that we're going to see more like $4,200 Gene Segura than 7% that we have him at right now. But I if the ownership holds, Phillies are going to be my favorite team, probably. Just combination of upside and ownership. I think they look good top to bottom. How do you feel about Baltimore, though? That's the real interesting piece to me because they sort of have the same sort of benefit. It's not like Matt Moore's any good. How do you feel about the Orioles?
Kind of the same way I always do about the Orioles. I like Mullins, Mountcastle, Santander, Hayes, and then the rest of the lineup. You're kind of just praying. If it is Moore, Severino does have power from the right side as a catcher. You could use him. So clearly not as good a spot or as good an offense, I guess I should say, as Philadelphia, but they are relatively inexpensive. Mullins price tag for whatever reason is back down to 4,300 on DraftKings. Santander and Hayes are both 3,200. Severino's 3,200. So I do think that you can use the Orioles here, but obviously prefer Philadelphia. And it does matter who's pitching for the Phillies too. This is assuming that it's a bullpen game.
If Baltimore is really unowned like this, Mullins at 4% is the high mark. Everybody else in the 2s. I think they're pretty dramatically underowned given the pitching.
Yeah, and it's with Mullins too. It's worth noting that Matt Moore isn't particularly good against lefties. So you really, I don't think, he's not likely to throw a lot of innings anyway. But I don't really think you should be discounting Mullins just because it's a lefty-lefty matchup.
Is this the best game on the slate for DFS?
There's a Coors Field game.
Sure. So, I think it's close.
Probably not.
Implied total on this game, 10.5 runs. Coors Field, just over 10.5 runs.
I'll say one side.
No ownership to Phillies in Baltimore.
One side of Coors Field, I guess, is not really in play. So,
I think this is the best game on the slate given the current ownership.
Yeah, I think that it has a chance to be, I guess. But like you were saying, I think a lot of that data ends up changing once we get actual confirmed pitchers. So it's hard to know exactly what it looks like.
Yeah, I don't really know how that works. Obviously, it's affecting the top stack probability. I didn't know if it would affect ownership.
Right.
It's not like the Phillies are getting owned. Like they are one of the top owned teams. I thought it was going to be a little bit higher, but looks like there's some value elsewhere that's still easy to get to. It's possible the ownership is just right individually. And if that's the case, I'm very, very interested in this entire game. Do you have a favorite bat here?
Yeah, I was going to say, if the ownership is actually right and Bryce Harper is, 10% and Didi at 3K is 10%, then the Phillies look great. So favorite bat, obviously Harper. I think Real Muto might be the most valuable when you factor in position because especially on DraftKings, he's multi-position eligible, but the important piece obviously being that he's a catcher.
Yeah, like $3,200 Santander at 1.9% ownership. That feels like a great play today.
Yeah.
Well, go Phillies, go Orioles. I like this one. We will keep it moving, though. Yankees and Rangers, another decent spot for offense. 5.1 run implied total for the Yanks, 3.3 for the Rangers. Jordan Montgomery and Dane Dunning. Jordan Montgomery, chalk pitcher for today, currently projected for 40% ownership. That is a big number at 8,300. I largely agree with it. He is to me, one of the 3 best options you can get to. We don't have Joe Musgrove in the ownership right now. I think that's going to make things change a little bit as we move forward. But how are you feeling about Montgomery here against the Rangers?
I feel pretty good about it. I think this is a tough pitching slate. So on the one hand, when you have 22 total pitchers and you look at Jordan Montgomery at 8,300, and it's sort of like, okay, the price tag makes sense. He's probably about where he should be. So my first inclination is, in tournaments that I would probably end up coming under the field and just going with some lower owned guys. But the issue is that there's not really a whole lot of appealing pitching on this slate, just because of a combination of, one, a lot of bad pitchers, and two, a lot of the better pitchers are in pretty difficult matchups. So Montgomery really stands out here because he has the matchup against the Rangers, which is one of the most favorable spots you can be in. He's a good pitcher. He has a 24.8% strikeout percentage, 3.91 xFIP for the season. Texas right now with a 3.3 implied run total, one of the lowest on the slate. Montgomery just fits in really easily. I crunched a cash lineup before the show just to sort of get a feel for the optimal build, and Montgomery was in it. So I think it just ends up being a really useful price point where, the ownership makes sense, even though it's a little uncomfortable how high it is.
Are you worried about the ownership on Dunning coming in at a crisp 1% now against the Yankees?
I am not. I'm a little worried about the matchup, though.
Yeah, as you should be. So I've got the Yankees as my number 5 stack, but I do have them quite a bit over-owned for right now. Still happy to get there. And they're cheap. Again, Judge is 5,100. Everybody else in this team is 4,200 or below. It's not difficult to buy the power of Giancarlo Stanton or Joey Gallo. What are you going to do with the Yankees here against Dunning?
So a lot's going to matter on the ownership. Like you were saying, they right now we don't have them pulling that much. We actually have them going a little bit under owned. Individually, I'm pulling that up now, but individually, Rizzo getting 15%, Gallo at 14, LeMahieu at 13, Sanchez at 10, everybody else lower. If that's the case, I think they look fine. I don't think Dunning's a bad pitcher, but certainly not a good enough pitcher that I'm going to shy away from the power in the Yankees lineup. And then also you have concerns over exactly how deep into this game Dunning's going to go. Through 43 pitches last time out, 14 pitches in his previous start. They've said, I think, that the plan is to build him back up to throwing 80 or 90 pitches by the end of the season. So, maybe you get 60, 65 pitches, like 4 innings from him tonight. But I think it's, a really high upside spot for the Yankees. Definitely one of these teams where I don't feel strongly enough about them where like I would be planning to roster them a lot at any ownership. But the way it looks right now, I think they look pretty good.
Okay. We just got a super chat from Nick, and I want to hit on this question quickly, but I think you and I are on the same page. How do you guys feel about stacking a game 5-3 in general? For example, using a 5-3 of Philly and Baltimore, or do you just try to use one side of a game per line? I don't ever notice it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like intentionally game stack or not, but I will say that there's no reason that you should only be using one side. Like, there is, I think, a little bit of positive correlation within a game because you just get situations like, if a umpire is calling a particularly tight zone, that's going to affect both teams. If the weather is favorable for hitting, that's going to positively affect both teams. If the Phillies score a quick 8 runs, they're not going to use their best relievers down the stretch, which positively benefits the Orioles. So there is some positive correlation. There's not enough for me to force it in. But as far as the second part of that question, there's no reason to avoid it.
Absolutely. Are you avoiding Rangers bats today? No ownership at all coming in. Probably not all that surprising. They don't look particularly good, but Jordan Montgomery is pulling 40% ownership. Is this a spot for you to get on the opposite side of some pitching ownership?
I don't really think so. There's just so many offenses on the slate. Texas is just so bad. Like I said before, only a 3.3 implied run total. They're not even that cheap when you look at the part of the order that you would really like. Adolis Garcia is 4,600. Andy Ibanez is 4,500. Nathaniel Lowe is 5K. I don't mind the DJ Peters price tag at 2,600, assuming he's batting cleanup. But it's a pretty tough sell for me to get to Texas here. And because, again, like you and I were saying, we think Montgomery's ownership is about where it should be too. So I'm not viewing it as a spot where he's getting more than he should. I think that it makes sense, the ownership he's getting. I think you can always make a case to go up against the 40% owned pitcher, but I still think there's a lot of opportunity cost for hitters on the slate. When you have the Phillies game, you have the Coors Field game, you have a bunch of other bad pitchers. It becomes pretty tough for me to prioritize Texas.
We're on the same page here. I don't really want to get on the opposite side of the Montgomery ownership. It's not crazy in the largest field stuff just because 40% is a lot. And I think Jordan Montgomery is, like just a little bit above average, not like a truly elite guy. But either way, the Rangers offense is the opposite of that. Pretty bad. Anything else for Yankees and Rangers?
No, I think that's it. Lots of Yankees stuff.
Yeah. Red Sox and Mets, 5-run implied total for the Red Sox, 4.4 for the Mets. Eduardo Rodriguez and Marcus Stroman. Erod is at 24% ownership right now, and Marcus Stroman is at just 1. These guys are separated by $600. Do I think that Erod is the better option from a DFS perspective today? Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if I really like 24% Erod at 8,600 today.
Yeah, I don't love the 24%. I will say I think that he's a natural pivot away from Jordan Montgomery, because he is getting basically like 60% of the ownership. So if you need to save ownership and you're in that price range, I do think Rodriguez works. I do prefer Montgomery between the two if ownership doesn't matter. I just think that the matchup's a lot better. A little kind of confused why the Mets implied run total is at 4.5. I think Rodriguez is a good pitcher. I think he's been unlucky for a lot of the season, but a 3.49 xFIP, 27.1% strikeout percentage. The Mets are a pretty average offense. So kind of confused why the implied run total is so high. But, again, I think if ownership doesn't matter, I lean Montgomery. If it does matter, Rodriguez certainly gives you the same sort of ceiling Montgomery does, even if the matchup's a little bit riskier.
Do you have any interest in paying the 9,200 for Stroman? Just doesn't feel like that kind of spot.
Yeah, not really. He's not a great strikeout pitcher. He is a good real life pitcher, but also a tough matchup against the Red Sox. The only real case I guess I could make for Stroman is just that there's not much. There's one pitcher right now that we're not projecting for ownership. Actually, there's 2 pitchers that we're not projecting for much ownership that I actually like. But other than that, there's not a lot of low owned pitching that I feel good about at all. So if I have a lineup where, I don't know, I'm stacking the Dodgers and the Phillies or something, assuming the Phillies are pulling some ownership, Stroman would make sense in a lineup like that just because he's a good enough actual pitcher. He's only got a 22% strikeout percentage, but a 3.51 xFIP, 0.75 home runs per 9. Like, he's a good pitcher. There's a pretty decent chance that he gives you 6-7 innings and, gives up a couple of runs. So in a lineup where you have chalkier bats, I think there's a place for him. And you're just basically saying, okay, I need Stroman to beat Jordan Montgomery and to beat Eduardo Rodriguez. That's not the toughest ask in the world. But as far as prioritizing him and getting a lot of him, I think it's a pretty tough one.
It's an interesting spot for bats. I'm not super excited about taking there's obviously a ton of talent on the Red Sox side, but I don't really like targeting against Stroman on a slate like this. There's some interest to me in some Mets bats just because Erod's in a quarter of the lineups. It just doesn't feel like the best slate to target offense. I'm really curious to know where you're going to go on either side, honestly.
Yeah, so one spot to pay attention to in the Mets lineup is JD Davis. If he's in there, he's only 2,100 on DraftKings. That would be a really, really good piece of value that you can use because he's a good hitter and there's no reason for him to be that cheap. If he's not in the lineup, though, then obviously you lose that. But since the Mets are getting a DH, I would kind of think he's going to be in there. VR at 3,600 offers some value as well. But yeah, it's not a spot that I really love. I do think that you could make a case for some of the right-handed power here, especially because Rodriguez is pulling some ownership. Even though he's not getting as much as Montgomery, I would rather, if I'm looking to negatively correlate with the field, I'd rather go to the Mets than go to the Rangers, just because I think that there are a lot more appealing pieces in the Mets lineup, but still not a team that I would expect to be my highest owned or anything like that. And then on the other side, you can always make a pretty strong case for going to the Red Sox when they're not projected for a lot of ownership. Right now, we have them with a 5% chance of being a top stack, 2% aggregate ownership. So going a little bit under owned, but Stroman's certainly not a pitcher that I'm going out of my way to target against. Kind of surprised by the Red Sox implied run total as well at 5.1. I don't know. I haven't looked at weather. I don't know if the wind's blowing out hard or if there's a really favorable hitters ump in this game or something, but the total here is kind of strange to me given the pitchers.
I have it at 4.6 for the Red Sox. After I do my calculations, given the matchup. And I think that's it makes more sense to me to be under that mark. I don't I don't think that Boston should have a huge number up against Stroman. What's the playoffs look like right now? Rays are in. Boston is, for all intents and purposes, in. Astros are essentially in. White Sox are in. Okay.
Giants are in.
Yeah. So I was just looking at the AL. I guess I should have looked at the NL too. Braves and Phillies. Mets have nothing. They would need a miracle. Brewers are in. Dodgers and Giants are in. Okay. Good to know. I don't have anything else here for Boston or New York.
No, me neither. Just a spot. Pay attention to the Vegas line on this one because would not be at all surprised if it's lower when we come back later.
I bet the under already. 11 a.m. So coming up after this, NFL Strategy Show. First look for week 3 in the NFL. Laffy, Ben, and Jordan V. Then Adam and I will be back at 5. Again, 5, not 4:45, for the MLB Deeper Dive.
Thank you for letting me know.
Yeah, you're welcome. MLB Live before lock. Eric and Greg will close it out and take you all the way up to 7:05. Plus, MLB player rankings are free. If you are watching this show, I assume that's interesting information to you. MLB player rankings are free. Rays and Jays, 4.3 run implied total for the Rays, 4.2 for the Jays. Drew Rasmussen and Alek Manoah. Rasmussen at 3% owned, 6,800. Alek Manoah is 31% owned at 9,500. Tough spot here, though, against Tampa. Where are you leaning on Manoah?
Kind of feels like the Robbie Ray spot yesterday. Obviously, he's not as good as Robbie Ray is, but there is a lot of strikeout upside going up against Tampa. It is a favorable park for pitchers. On the other side, it's a really scary spot because this is one of the best offenses in baseball. Alek Manoah has good strikeout stuff. He has a 26.6% strikeout percentage for the season, 4.11 xFIP, 1.06 home runs per 9. So certainly can get hit relatively hard, but has the stuff to go out and have success here against Tampa. So I think this is a spot where I like both sides. The 30% ownership's a little bit scary, but at the same time, he's in one of the highest upside spots on the slate, I think. And, he is a good pitcher. So I get why the ownership's there. If it were lower, I think that I would be, advocating pretty strongly for Manoah. So it makes sense where it's at. But certainly a lot of downside here as well. You do have a 4.5 implied run total for Tampa. They have tons of power in this lineup. So it's a spot where I do like Manoah. I expect to get there in tournaments. Don't think I need him in cash, but you also have Tampa Bay getting virtually no ownership. And this is an offense that is just really, really good.
Any Rasmussen?
I don't think so. He's been putting up decent numbers for his salary at 6,800. My concern is just that he's still not going deep into games. He's thrown 5 innings in 3 of his last 5 starts, 4 innings in the other ones. Hasn't thrown more than 74 pitches. Was pulled last start after 52 pitches in 5 innings. So it's kind of tough to count on him going deep enough to really accumulate points that way. And then it's a really, really difficult matchup against the Blue Jays as well. He did fine against them last time out, but still not something I really want to rely on. As a starter this year, he only has a 19.3% strikeout percentage, 3.78 xFIP. I think he's a pretty good pitcher. I just have a hard time really getting to him in this spot, given the concerns over how deep he's going to go into the game.
I'm assuming this is a tricky spot for you from an offense perspective. I like both offenses. Both pitchers are good. Prices are up on both of these teams in comparison to what we've seen so far. I don't think that I get to a lot of Rays and Jays.
I think I would get to the Rays first just because Manoah is pulling ownership. Right now, we have every single hitter on Tampa Bay projected for less than 1% ownership on DraftKings. That's really appealing considering, how much power is in this lineup. But like you were saying too, the salaries really matter because we don't really have cheap pitching that we want to go to at all on the slate. So not that we have the most expensive pitching, but there's not really much to pay down for. So when you're talking about Cruz being 5,800 and Lau being 5,400, but then you do get some value. Like Meadows 4,400 is very reasonable. G-Man Choi at 3,500. Arozarena is 43. So there are some very reasonably priced bats in the middle, and then you can use Taylor Walls also as a cheap value option, or Kiermaier. So I don't think the Rays should be that difficult to get to. On the other side, Toronto a little more difficult because the hitters that you would really want are really expensive. But even there, you're probably going to have a cheap Dickerson, Gurriel, Jansen, Lamb that you can use to balance that out. So neither team is someone that I would expect to be, my highest owned stack, but I do think in tournaments being overweight on one or both of these teams makes a lot of sense given that neither team is pulling any ownership and both teams have massive ceilings, even though their matchups aren't the best.
Anything else for Rays and Jays?
No, I think just kind of one of my favorite, contrarian hitter spots.
Okay. Brewers and Cardinals, 4.5 run implied total for the Brewers, just 3 for the Cardinals. Brandon Woodruff and Jake Woodford, battle of the woods. Woodruff, 40% owned today. I think that is more than warranted. He's very clearly, to me, the top pitching option for today. How do you feel about Woodruff?
Good. The only, I guess, semi concern would be the Brewers don't really have anything to play for. You're seeing him pretty much just go 6 innings and be done. 90 pitches last time out, 101, 92, 104. So they haven't really pulled him back. They're just, not pushing him. I think, at this point to go get 7 or 8 innings, but that's kind of splitting hairs when you talk about the pitching on this slate. Woodruff, I think, clearly a better, more talented pitcher than Alek Manoah, than Jordan Montgomery. I don't think there's anyone really close to him on this slate. The matchup's not the best. The Cardinals can be tough to strike out, but overall, they're not a great offense. Woodruff has a 29.6% strikeout percentage, 3.05 xFIP. I think that if, even though he's getting the most ownership, or basically the same as Montgomery, I feel better about him than I do about Manoah or Montgomery or Rodriguez. I mean, these are all guys where if they pitch poorly, you're not really that surprised. If Woodruff pitches poorly, it's kind of noteworthy.
Any Woodford?
I don't think so. How deep's he been going?
I got him in for 4 innings here, and he's useless.
61 pitches last time out, 66, 74, 72 in July. So in 3 appearances in September, he's thrown 61, 66, and 74 pitches, 4, 4, and 5 1/3 innings, 5,600. There's not really pay down pitching on this slate. So from that standpoint, I think it's okay. Kind of like we'll talk about with Paul Blackburn and Alec Mills. You're not going to feel good about these guys, but if you have to pay down, they make at least a little bit of sense. But ideally, with 11 offenses to choose hitters from, I'm going to be able to just find value somewhere that I don't need to pay down. Speaking
of hitters, how are you feeling about the Brewers' bats against Woodford?
I think it's a decent spot. They have a 4.5 implied run total. They're not that expensive. I like Willy Adames at 3,800. He's been really, really good this year. Shortstop, not always the easiest position to fill out. And then I think today you're going to see a lot of ownership, deservedly so, going to Corey Seager. That'll make Adames a little bit lower owned than he otherwise probably would be here. So yeah, the Brewers look good. You do have Narvaez is priced up a bit. Escobar is back to 5K, but overall not too expensive here. And Woodford, I think, kind of just a middle of the road pitcher.
I have no interest in Cardinals bats.
No, me neither.
Okay. Cubs and Twins, 4.1 run implied total for the Cubs, 3.9 for the Twins. Alec Mills and Griffin Jax, both guys in the teens in ownership, 14% for Mills, 17% for Jax. I'm a little lighter on both. I'm going to go open my front door and throw it to you. What are you doing with the pitching here?
So I think both of them make sense because of how cheap they are. And again, there's just not a lot to pay down for. But I do think that ideally, I just don't need to pay down and can find cheaper bats. Mills, I think, pretty clearly is the better real life pitcher of the two. He doesn't strike out a lot of guys, but for the season, 4.05 xFIP, 1.04 home runs per nine, doesn't walk hitters, only a 4.9% walk percentage. So that all looks good for him, but only, a 17.3% strikeout percentage. There are good hitters in the Twins lineup. There are also strikeouts there as well. On the other hand, for Jax, he's facing the Cubs, who have the highest strikeout percentage in baseball since the trade deadline. Looks like the wind is blowing in Wrigley. If that's the case, obviously it's favorable for the pitching. I'm not positive that's the case though, but either way, it's a team that strikes out a lot, and that certainly benefits Jax. The issue is that the Cubs offense does actually have power. They've basically been league average in terms of production since the trade deadline. It's just that they strike out a lot. So when you get a pitcher like Jax that has only struck out 17.5% of hitters in the majors, has a 5.67 xFIP, has allowed 2.2 home runs per nine, to me, that just makes the Cubs actually look pretty good, because you're taking a pitcher that doesn't miss bats and you're throwing him up against this lineup that has power and just has a lot of swing and miss. If they're likely to put the ball in play, then I think it's actually a pretty good spot for them.
It's wild to see two pitchers like this in the mid sixes pulling this 15% ownership. I'm intrigued by it. Scares me because the Cubs offense is bad. It makes me, I just don't know what to make of it. They're just not like DFS pitchers. It's like two mirrored. It's like the Spider-Man meme for these two guys today.
I mean, one's a lot better than the other. Oh
yeah, Mills is a lot better than Griffin Jax, but we'll see. I'm going to get to more offense in this game than I ever expected to, and I guess it's a price thing. I've got the Cubs 6th. I've got the Twins 8th. I didn't expect this for such a low total game, and maybe this is just a win thing, and I'll have to take a look at it. But yeah, I've got both teams. It looks like it's higher.
It looks like it's supposed to be blowing in hard.
Okay. Yeah, that might be a manual adjustment that I need to make. Obviously, a little bit different for Chicago than it is for some other spots, because I have the offense a little bit heavier. So talk to me about bats. Is this the spot you're getting to? If the wind is blowing in so hard, it might not be that spot.
Yeah, I mean, the wind is the biggest concern for me. Like, if the wind isn't a factor, then I really like getting to these offenses because they both have power. They're both facing pretty questionable pitchers. I would really like the Cubs offense, but the wind certainly does knock that down a bit. And I think that's why you're seeing such a low total here. I still like getting to the Cubs just because I think it is a good spot against Jax. You have, some power in Schwindel, Happ, Contreras, Ortega's been fine. Patrick Wisdom has power. None of them are expensive either. So it'll be easy to pay up for the pitching that you want, but the wind certainly something to keep an eye on, see what it looks like as we approach lock. Also looks like it's supposed to be like low 60s. So definitely could just be some really bad hitting weather.
Yeah. Twins are popping for me too. Not really getting all that much ownership. There's enough power here, whether that's Buxton, Polanco, Donaldson, Kepler, Sano. I mean, that 2 through 6 has a lot of power. Polanco, not like the craziest power in the world, but second base, shortstop eligibility. Most expensive guy on the slate for Minnesota. What do we do with Minnesota against Mills? This is a weird game in general.
Yeah, it is. I think the Twins are a little more difficult to get to than the Cubs because, for one, I think Mills is better than Jax, but also they're a little bit more expensive. Buxton at 4,800, Polanco at 5K. Certainly would love to get to those guys because they're good, but tough to prioritize them compared to some of the other spots on this slate. Donaldson, reasonably priced. Kepler's cheap, which is nice. But again, if the wind's blowing in here, I think it's going to be harder to get to this game in general. And I would get to the Cubs side before the Twin side because I think Griffin Jax is just absolute garbage. Twins are okay, but not likely to really make the cut for me. Like, I think when I'm looking at relatively low probability offenses that we've talked about already, I would get to Tampa Bay before I get to the Twins. I'd get to Toronto before I get to the Twins. I get to the Cubs before I get to the Twins.
Anything else for Cubs and Twins?
No, I don't think so. There's going to be I think there actually deserves to be quite a bit of ownership going to like different parts of this game, which is kind of surprising when you consider that it's two, average offenses and average to below average pitchers.
It's a good time to sign up at Awesemo.com using the promo code MLB Strategy Show. One giant word. Get an Awesemo Plus weekly pass for $29.95. This includes full access to everything we have. Player projections, ownership projections, premium Slack, all of our top stack and top pitcher, top everything tools, all included. You get a lot of stuff. So again, use that promo code MLB Strategy Show. One gigantic word. It's 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. Time to talk about it. Rockies and Dodgers. 4.6 run implied total for the Rocks, 6.3 for the Dodgers. Antonio Senzatella and question mark. I've got Julio Urias right now. I don't know if that's going to be the case, but insert Dodgers pitcher here. If it's Urias at 9,900, are you interested?
Yeah, definitely. He's so right now we do have him in the top pitchers tool, pulling no ownership, 17% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. I think his ownership ends up coming up to where, it's more than like 1%, but I would fully expect Alek Manoah to get more ownership. I would expect Woodruff to get more, Montgomery and Rodriguez to get more, Gausman to get more. So it makes sense to me that Urias wouldn't pull much ownership here. Yeah, it's a tough spot to pitch in. Obviously the Rocky strikeout percentage at home is like 7 points lower than on the road. The outfield's massive, so it's not even a home run issue so much as a balls in play end up becoming hits issue. But this is a slate where pretty much every talented pitcher is getting ownership except for Urias and to some extent Kevin Gausman. So I do like getting to Urias in tournaments. I think he's a really good pivot away from someone like Manoah, especially if you are going to more popular bats. If you're playing the Dodgers, if you're playing the Phillies, something like that, you get the same sort of upside from Urias that you get from Manoah, even though, the matchup is clearly scary.
Going to be a wild one here. How many shares of Senzatella you looking to get to today?
Hopefully less than 1.
Yeah, absolutely. The Dodgers are the number 1 stack today. There's no way around it. If you're looking at any data and someone tells you that it's someone else, you should stop looking at that as a source of data. But what do we do with the Dodgers today in Coors as a clearly chalk option?
Pay attention to the ownership in the rest of your lineup. The nice thing is that there's 11 games on this slate. So while the Dodgers are popular, Corey Seager on DraftKings leads the way at 26% ownership. Trey Turner rather is at 22%. And then you get a drop off down to like 17% for Bellinger, 15% for Smith. So they're popular, but at least it's not one of those spots where it's, 35% and it's just putting you in the situation where everyone is on them basically. So they're low enough owned because of how many games there are that I'm still looking to get there. You just have to pay attention to the rest of your team. Like I was saying before, Urias makes sense, in Dodger stacks, not only because there's positive correlation, but just because he's low owned, maybe using Gausman instead of Woodruff and some of those, stuff like that, using the Rays as the secondary stack or, a primary Rays stack with 3 Dodgers or whatever is going to work because of how low owned they are. So you can still get there. It's still a very good spot in Colorado. I don't think Senzatella is a bad pitcher either. So I'm not looking at this game like I would if it was like a Chichi Gonzalez game where it's just like, there's no way the Dodgers fail, because I think Senzatella is fine, but 6.5 implied run total, very, very good offense. Huge park upgrade, clearly. So nothing negative to say about the Dodgers. I think you just kind of have to be cognizant of the rest of your lineup if you're going to play them.
Are you going to play the Rockies?
I doubt it. I mean, Hampson's really cheap. Rogers is really cheap. Crone is really cheap. Story's fine.
Story's pretty cheap for 4,700 in Coors.
Yeah. It's assuming it's Urias. I mean, the matchup is really, really difficult, but they do still have a 4.5 implied run total. I'm assuming that they're not pulling much ownership right now.
Really?
Yeah, we have them with like 1% aggregate ownership. So they're fine. I think I would still rather go to like Tampa Bay or Toronto just because of the quality of hitters in their lineup. But there is some value here. There is some right-handed power. If it ends up not being Urias and ends up being, a more questionable pitcher, then obviously I would like them even more.
I have them 7th overall, 9th in terms of leverage. So like dead in the middle of the pack. And that's against Urias too. So like if it's not him, I guess I can get a little bit better potentially, but you never know with the Dodgers. Just going to be a lot of Dodgers bats. There's no real way to dodge it other than I didn't even mean to do that. Other than them being expensive, but they should be. The whole team is loaded. Of the 8 guys in this Dodgers lineup, Chris Taylor has the lowest projected steamer WRC plus at 110.
Yeah.
That might be the highest I've ever seen for a team.
Crazy good lineup.
The 3 guys in the first 4 north of 130. Oh my God. It's terrifying. I'm surprised the total's not higher.
Yeah. And then they have speed also.
Yeah, they're just loaded. I don't have anything else here. I mean, everybody knows play the Dodgers bats.
Yeah, someone mentioned, and I kind of mentioned it, and someone else said it in the chat. Like Sensatella does actually do a decent job of mitigating damage typically, but it's still just it's the Dodgers and Coors. Don't overthink it.
Yeah, they're just gonna get mushed likely. And anyway, Angels and Astros, 3.8 run implied total for the Angels, 5.2 for the Stros. Because it wouldn't be a show if Packy Naughton wasn't the starter for the Angels.
Feels like he pitches every 2 days now.
It really does. Jose Urquidy going for the Astros, 12% ownership for Urquidy at $9K. No ownership going to Packy Naughton. We're going to go ahead and skip Naughton for this one up against the Astros. Talk to me about Urquidy.
Good matchup for him. He's only 9K. So that's, not a bad price. The Angels have plenty of strikeouts in their lineup. The issue with Urquidy is just, how deep into the game is he going to go? I am cautiously optimistic after his last start. He only threw 81 pitches, but previously he had thrown 70 and 71. He went 6 innings in that start. So typically when I see that, it kind of just tells me that, he got through 6 innings at 81 pitches and they were just like, okay, like that's good. But typically, I think had he been at 86, 87 pitches, that would have been fine also. So I'm kind of looking at Urquidy like he's fully stretched out now and can at least give us 85 to 90 pitches. Only 9K is a pretty good price tag. Ownership's not really there. 12% when you compare that to Rodriguez and Montgomery at not too different salaries is pretty appealing. So I like Urquidy here. There's certainly risk because we don't know exactly how deep he'll be allowed to go, but assuming he can give us 6 innings and 85 to 90 pitches, I do think it's a good spot for him.
I know we're not going to Packy Naughton, so we'll move straight to the offense. Astros are my number 3 stack. I do have them basically neutral from an ownership perspective. Bregman pulling a ton. No one else. Chas McCormick also pulling a ton at the flat minimum. This seems like a great spot to grab some Houston bats against Packy Naughton.
Yeah, agreed. Someone made the point too. First game in Coors always difficult, which is true. But yeah, so I mean, I guess to kind of quickly touch on all that, the Dodgers are far from a lock. It's not a bad pitcher. It is the first game in Coors, all of that, but it's still clearly the best spot on the slate. As far as Houston goes, good spot for them. Not in limited sample in the majors so far, but has not been missing bats. 13.2% strikeout percentage against righties, 360 expected WOBA, 161 expected ISO. We know that there's a lot of power in Houston's lineup. I'm assuming Siri's not leading off today. You probably get Altuve back, which makes the lineup a bit more expensive, but still reasonable pricing when you have, Bregman at 4,200, Correa at 45, Gurriel at 41. So really high upside spot for the Astros, not pulling as much ownership as the Dodgers or the Braves either, which is pretty appealing.
Ohtani and nothing else?
Pretty much.
Jared Walsh.
I was going to say Jared Walsh, 3,800 is a good price tag. Brandon Marsh has been leading off and he's 2K. The Angels, yeah, I still don't want to get to a lot of them because the offense is so bad. But even though I think Urquidy's a good play, that's mostly because the Angels are so bad. I don't think he's a great pitcher. He has a 22% strikeout percentage, 4.27 xFIP. Definitely have no issues with Ohtani, Walsh, and a minimum salary Marsh if he's batting leadoff.
I don't have anything else in this one. Play a lot of Houston. Man, it feels like the top stacks are very cut and dry this week. Or not this week, for today.
Yeah, I agree.
It's just, it either is or isn't today. And I feel like the gap in the middle is really, really big. I don't know. It's a weird one. I'm excited to sum this one up because I think we're going to name a lot of teams that we like. And we're going to get to a point where it's just I don't know how I'm going to get all of those teams. And I think that might be interesting once we get there. All right. 3 more games to go. Now is the perfect time to talk at least a little bit about the presenting sponsor of this show. That would be Jock Market. Changing up fantasy sports. They've turned it into a stock exchange. So instead of waiting till the end of a game to make money, you can sell the shares of the players that you picked up in the pre-IPO stage at any point in time. This is my example normally, but if you buy some shares of a leadoff hitter and he hits a home run in his first at-bat, you can sell those shares right out of the gate and just lock in a profit if you want, or try to hold and hope he does it again a little bit later. Whether that's NBA, MLB, NHL, or PGA, you can make real money constantly in all of these contests. Use the promo code Awesemo when signing up. Get a $50 bonus on your first deposit. This offer is exclusive to the Awesemo community, so you want to make sure that you're taking advantage of it. Go to Jock Market, check it out, download the app in the App Store. Make sure you're using that promo code. Love Jock Market. 3 more to go. A's and Mariners. 4.5 run implied total for the A's, 4.1 for the Mariners. Paul Blackburn and Marco Gonzalez. Neither guy is pulling any ownership. Blackburn is 3% owned at 5,700. Marco Gonzalez is 2% owned at 8,100. I'm not really excited about it, but I'd be okay with having both guys slightly more than they are currently owned.
Yeah. So the thing with Gonzalez, it's just really hard to see, I think, the upside for him at 8,100. Yep. The park is good, but he's not a very good strikeout pitcher. The A's are difficult to strike out. They have tons and tons of right-handed power in this lineup. Gonzalez only has an 18.6% strikeout percentage for the season, 5.1 xFIP. It's really hard for me to pay that salary. And then on the other side for Blackburn, just an absolutely terrible strikeout pitcher. The Mariners give you plenty of strikeouts, but he's coming into the game with a 14.8% strikeout percentage. Doesn't typically go that deep into games. Looking at his recent starts, 79 pitches, 65, 69, 72. Did throw 97 5 starts ago against Seattle at the end of August. But for Blackburn, I think I think it'll be easier to get to Blackburn than Gonzalez just because he is so cheap. Like when you look at where ownership's going right now, you have ownership going to Jacks, you have the ownership going to Mills that we talked about, where it's kind of just like, yeah, I get it because of how cheap they are, but they're still not very good DFS pitchers. Blackburn still gives you kind of that same range of outcomes, whereas, he's not a very good strikeout pitcher. He is in a decent spot for strikeouts, but he's getting a fraction of the ownership. So I don't really mind getting a little bit more Blackburn at the expense of Mills and Jacks.
Yeah, I have Blackburn coming out of the sim at 11%. So I don't think it's crazy at 5,700. It just doesn't feel all that great. What does feel pretty standard for me here is that I don't expect to have offense on either side. And there are individual power bats that I'd be happy to pull out, but I just don't really like going to the Oakland home games all that much.
Yeah, that's where I am too. I mean, Oakland's always a team that I like to roster, but I think on this slate, I'd be more inclined to go to teams like Tampa Bay and Toronto that are getting virtually no ownership in a relatively difficult matchup before I get to Oakland here. The park is not conducive for offense. The weather isn't conducive for offense. But Marco Gonzalez also, he's not good, but I don't think he's a terrible pitcher either. He has a lot of 226 expected ISO to righties this year. There's certainly upside for Oakland. It's just a matter of you have, a few popular offenses that are in really good spots like the Dodgers and Houston. And then you have some low-owned offenses that I like a little bit more, like Toronto and Tampa. It's going to just, I think, start to be a little bit difficult to get to Oakland.
Alrighty. Seattle bats. The only guy that showed up in more than 1% of my sims was Cal Raleigh at a crisp 2.
Yeah, I'll say 2K flat for him is fine. Kelenic at 3,300 is fine. I'd be more interested if the pricing were cheaper, but 5,500 for Haniger is a pretty tough sell. 5K for Seager is a pretty tough sell when that's, they're not priced that differently than the Dodgers are.
Next up, wow, we are flying through this slate, dude. Diamondbacks and Braves. 4.2 run implied total for the Diamondbacks, 5.3 for the Braves. Luke Weaver and Jesse Chavez. No ownership coming into this one, and I'm really curious if you're going to get to either side. I don't think that you can go to Chavez. He's not a long man, and I assume he is the actual starter for Atlanta. Luke Weaver, probably not the spot for it, so I'm curious where you're at.
Yeah, not really sure what the plan is for Chavez, but he most recently pitched on the 18th. He threw 13 pitches, so I'm not anticipating him going deep enough into this game for me to have any interest there. Weaver on the other side, kind of just an average pitcher, I think. 7,800 is an okay price, but not really a matchup I want to get to here. He's, like I said, kind of just a guy, not somebody I'm normally looking to roster for the season. He has struck out 21.5% of hitters, 4.24 xFIP, 1.3 home runs per 9. Not really looking to get to him all that frequently here.
Yeah, makes some sense to me. I didn't have anything popping up from a pitching perspective. Bats, I'm really interested to get your thought process. I don't have the Braves nearly where our current ownership does. They are ultra chalky. I have them as the biggest negative leverage stack that you can find on this slate. It is not as big in our top stack tool right now, but I am not as interested in going to Atlanta as our current ownership. I would rather have 0 as of right now, based on what I see.
They were 1 too. When I saw the implied run total, I was kind of confused, but we've seen that a lot, I think, with teams against Arizona this year, just that even if they don't really get to the starter, they can get to the bullpen after. Weaver, it goes both ways. Like I'm not super excited to get to him against the Braves. I do think, it's viable given the Braves ownership, but I'm not that excited to get to the Braves against him either. Going back to the start of the 2019 season, 25.9% strikeout percentage against righties. He has allowed a 200 expected ISO. So there's certainly upside here for Atlanta, but there's a lot of right-handed bats in this lineup that'll strike out. You look at Soler, you look at Riley, you look at Duvall. So it's like, I think it's a good spot. I think the pricing is pretty fair when you have Soler at 3,800, you have Rosario at 2,900, but I just don't think it's that good of a spot for them to be pulling quite as much ownership as they are.
Yeah, it's like Eddie Rosario is 22% owned. That just feels really, really high.
Yeah, like Rosario and Soler pulling ownership, I think, is one thing. And I was going to say that if it was the case where like they were the only ones, then Atlanta would still look pretty good. But what's actually weird to me, and it's not a knock on these guys, obviously, but Freddie Freeman pulling 18%, Ozzie Albies pulling 16%. That's kind of weird when you have the Dodgers and Coors where you have Muncy and Trey Turner at those respective positions. You have, it's not like it's ever difficult to find good first base plays. So it's kind of weird that like the expensive guys in the Braves order are pulling as much ownership as they are.
I mean, I greatly prefer the Phillies to the Braves today. I don't even think it's close. I dramatically would rather have more Phillies.
I think it's close, but I think when you factor in the pricing too, the Phillies are going to look better.
Should it be close?
I think so. The Braves have so much power.
I mean, we got a better park in Philly.
Yeah, better park, worse pitcher.
We've got a full run. If the line ends up being 10.5 for Baltimore and Philly, which is what I see at one particular book, that's a full run ahead of this Atlanta game. Like, I don't know how I could ever get Atlanta ahead of Philly in that scenario. I think they're the worst play of the day based on their current ownership. Obviously, like, I don't want the Cardinals at all against Woodruff. This is explaining it from a GPP perspective. I think Atlanta is the worst play of the day.
At their current ownership, I don't really disagree.
I have their implied total at 4.4 runs, almost a full run below what we're getting in the market. I guess, am I overrating Luke Weaver?
Probably, but like, I don't think he's bad. He gives up power. He gets a decent amount of strikeouts, particularly against right-handed bats, but he's just like, I think he's just an average pitcher.
To me, that's pretty good in comparison to what we're getting in the Philadelphia game. Like, Chris Ellis isn't.
Yeah, and to be clear, and I'm not sure if you agree or not, like, my biggest issue with Atlanta is the ownership. I think it's a good spot. I like the Braves. But if they're going to get ownership like they are right now, I'll just go elsewhere. I
have them 11th. I actually just don't like them for two separate reasons. I don't like them in general, and the ownership makes it even easier.
Okay, I like them in general.
Okay. Yeah, maybe it's a Luke Weaver thing. Also, we'll see where we end up. If the Phillies total comes down to like 9.5, I think that'll change things up a little bit, but I'm going to have Atlanta as the most over-owned team right now. It's a weird game for me. Sorry, Braves. I know I'm not supposed to talk about you guys like this, but it's happening. Don't play the Braves. That's my recommendation. If you want to back me, we're going to be not backing the Atlanta Braves. We're also not going to be backing the Diamondbacks. I don't really have any interest in going to Arizona. Do you? Cole Calhoun for 2,700 looks nice.
Yeah, that's what's Calhoun at 2,700. Kelly at 3,700 is fine, but no, nothing that I'm prioritizing.
All righty. Final game on the slate, Padres and Giants. 3.8 run implied total for the Pods, 3.7 for the Giants. Joe Musgrove allegedly for San Diego. Kevin Gausman going for San Francisco. Gausman at 9% ownership. I actually have him slightly lower than that, but it's about right. $8,800 Joe Musgrove, though, popped quite a bit for me if he's starting today. Let's start with Gausman since we know he's pitching. How do you feel about him at 10-1?
I like him in tournaments. I don't think he's as good as Woodruff. They're basically priced the same, but he's getting 1/5 the ownership. For the season, Brandon Woodruff has a 29.6% strikeout percentage. Kevin Gausman's at 29.4%. They both have walk percentages between 6.3 and 6.9%. Woodruff's xFIP is 3.05. Gausman's 3.28. Woodruff's allowed 0.9 home runs per nine. Gausman's allowed 0.82. you're talking about pretty similar pitchers where, yes, Woodruff is better. And, he's facing the Cardinals instead of the Padres, which is a bit less scary. But from a range of outcomes, like ceiling perspective, I don't think they're that different here. And there's a huge ownership gap. So where, we have like some of these popular offenses, I like the Dodgers, I like Houston, I like Atlanta, even though I think they're a little bit overowned. I think Gossman's a really good pitcher to use to offset that ownership because you're not giving up much in the way of ceiling. You are giving up a little bit in the way of medium projection and the likelihood of reaching that ceiling. But I think that he's a really good pitcher who's just not pulling ownership right now.
Who should have the higher fantasy projection today, Kevin Gausman or Joe Musgrove?
I think Gausman.
Okay. What are your thoughts on Musgrove at 8,800 today, if he is the starter?
I think he's okay. I hate taking pitchers against the Giants. The offense is just so good. They're tough to strike out. They have basically above average hitters everywhere in their lineup. Musgrove is a good pitcher. He's got a 27.3% strikeout percentage, 3.61 xFIP. He's definitely in that. I feel pretty similarly about him, I guess, as I do like Eduardo Rodriguez. I think that the matchup is a little bit more difficult for Musgrove. I think the Giants offense is better than the Mets, but I feel similarly where it's like, yeah, he's a good pitcher. More often than not, I think he has success, but I just also don't feel great about it. So ultimately for Musgrove, it'll come down to an ownership thing for me. Like if Manoah, once we get Musgrove in the ownership projections, if Manoah is still pulling around 30% and Rodriguez is at 23, and let's say Musgrove's coming in at like 12, I'll like Musgrove. If Musgrove's coming in that same ballpark where, he's 25%, Manoah's 25, and Rodriguez is 25, then I would like him a bit less. And it's kind of the same thing, for the same reasons I was saying with Gausman. If later Woodruff is getting 30% and Gausman's getting 22, then I'm not really going to like Gausman that much. So it really is just going to come down to the ownership on both of these guys.
I have Joe Musgrove 1.7 points ahead of Erod. I have him basically as my favorite pitcher in this range. I like him just as much as Jordan Montgomery. Am I crazy?
I wouldn't say crazy. The Giants have a 3.6 implied run total. He's good. I just don't really like him quite as much.
Okay. Musgrove. Let's do this. Urquidy, Musgrove, Erod, Jordan Montgomery. Rank the four.
In what context?
Best to worst, general options, ownership be damned.
Montgomery 1. Either Musgrove or Rodriguez 2. Either Musgrove or Rodriguez 3, and then Urquidy.
I really wanted you to be like Urquidy 3 and then the other guy 4. Just like so it didn't make any sense. Okay, that works. But yeah, it's really like I think that whole grouping is just an ownership game, and obviously we'll have more complete information for the deeper dive show. But for tournaments, like the range of outcomes for those guys is so similar, and you can point to whoever you think is going to do the best based on their matchup. But like this goes back to just baseball tournaments in general, but especially in a sport like baseball, everybody is terrible at predicting what's going to happen in a one-game sample. So when you have guys that are as similar as they are, you should mostly just be saying, okay, like I'll take whatever, I'll just do whatever the field doesn't want to do, because even if I have my slight preferences, the range of outcomes is about the same. Padres and Giants bats don't look appealing to me in this one.
No, I don't think so either.
All righty. Well, then let's sum it up. Favorite stacks for today?
Dodgers, Astros, Phillies. As far as lower owned teams go, I'll throw Tampa Bay in there.
Okay. Dodgers are at the top for me, but if this breaks now, I think the Phillies are the best GPP stack you can get to. I like the Orioles given their current ownership. We'll see where that shakes out. Astros look fantastic. I am avoiding Atlanta very aggressively, at least as for right now. We'll see where we end up once we get to the deeper dive, which you and I will be doing in a couple hours. Favorite pitchers for the day?
Woodruff, Montgomery, Urias, if he's not getting ownership. This is one where I think in cash, I think it's Woodruff, Montgomery. In tournaments, it's kind of just like whoever's not pulling ownership, because I think that the range of outcomes for pretty much everyone is similar. Like Woodruff and Gausman is similar. Manoah, Montgomery, Rodriguez, Urias are all pretty similar. So in tournaments, I think this is one of the slates where I just end up going with the lower owned, being overweight on the lower owned pitchers in that group and underweight on the higher owned ones. In cash, though, right now, it looks like Woodruff and Montgomery to me.
Yeah, Woodruff for sure and Montgomery are both looking like the most likely cash options. I do have Joe Musgrove at the top of my list, just behind Woodruff overall. So we'll see if he gets named the starter, where his ownership ends up coming in. I'm anxious to see what the impact is to the rest of the starters. But I think that's it, man. I think we're done here. I don't have anything else to add. Do you?
No, I think that's it. Deeper dive should be a little bit different show since we'll hopefully have a little bit more information by then.
Yeah, you would think. NFL strategy show coming up in 5 minutes. The first look at week 3 in the NFL. You don't want to miss it. So hit that like button one last time if you haven't hit it already. Subscribe to the channel, notification bell, all that good stuff. Adam and I will be back in a couple hours for the deeper dive. Thank you guys for joining us, and thank you to Jock Market for being the presenting sponsor of this show. Good luck tonight, everybody. We'll talk to you again in a couple hours.